All right, folks, we're here. Katie, are you there?
Yeah, hello.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to Chai Hack Night.
Yeah, welcome to episode 411. We're so excited to have you here, and we're so excited to hear from Elliott Ramos of WBEZ tonight. Just a reminder that our run of show for the evening is, we did the starting of the live stream, so that's checked off the list there. But now we're doing the welcome and announcements. Then we'll start hearing from Elliott, and then we'll have some time for Q&A. And then we'll move from there into our Zoom call where we can all get to know each other a little better, go through our intros, the classic 3 words, start thinking about what yours will be. And we'll get to do announcements and talk about the breakout groups that'll be meeting tonight. And then breakout groups.
Yeah, so if you're interested in participating in tonight's Q&A, we will be taking questions from the live chat. So as you're watching tonight's presentation, please feel free to type in the questions as they come to you, and we'll be answering them in the order that they were submitted. And also worth reminding everyone that we have a code of conduct that is always in effect, even and especially now in online times. So you can view that on our website at the footer. There's a link to our code of conduct. So please take a look at that. Is it time for announcements, Katie?
Yeah, let's do some announcements.
All right. You want to do this one?
Sure. We've got some great presentations coming up. Next week, we're going to hear from Maya Shenwar and Victoria Law. And then the week after that, we'll hear from Jen Brandell. And the week after that, we'll hear from Victor Kovas about all 3 about very important and very relevant topics.
We've got a full calendar. And I think actually last I checked, we're almost booked through October. So just keep coming back here every Tuesday for more action-packed presentations. I could do this one. So this is something we've been doing for a while now at Chai Hack Night. It's a tech and data help desk. So over the years, Chai Hack Night has always been a place for folks have come for help and assistance on pro bono technology projects. And especially now in the age of COVID and where everyone's going remote, we wanted to create a way to make that easier to do. So we created a Google form that anyone can fill out if you need help, free help on anything tech or data related. You can go to the link shown on the screen here, which is bit.ly/CHN help desk. And if you want to be one of our many awesome volunteers who helps run that help desk, you can sign up as well using the second link, bit.ly/CHN help desk volunteer. So yeah, we've got I think about 30 volunteers at this point so far. Yeah, we have the requests keep coming in, so folks can join up there.
Cool. This next one, it looks like, I know this was mentioned previously in a presentation, I think from last week, but this is the Find My Landlord tool, and I don't know if you had more that you wanted to say about it, Derek. But
yeah, it's a cool tool. They pulled data from the assessor's office, and they, I think, cross-referenced it with data from the Secretary of State to identify the owners of properties in Chicago that have rental properties. And this is a especially useful tool because sometimes that's hard information to find out. And it's a tool for organizing for folks who are having trouble with their landlords. So the link to that is findmylandlord.chicagodsa.org.
Very cool. Cool. Well, it's about time that you requested your vote by mail ballot. So this is how you can do it. You can go to chicagoelections.gov if you're here in Chicago. If you're outside of Chicago and in the suburbs, you can go to cookcountyclerk.com. And if you're somewhere else in Illinois, illinoisvotes2020.com. If you're outside of Illinois, you're probably gonna have to Google it because I am not quite sure where to tell you to go. But it's important to do it. Let's vote.
Indeed, let's vote. And then this is, yeah, census, also a thing. In fact, I think the deadline for them to complete that is actually moved up now, so it's coming up soon. If you have not filled your census out yet, please do. If you know anybody who has not filled their census out yet, please do. It's easy, you can do it online now. It takes really only a couple minutes to do. And you can actually see they have a dashboard now that shows you just how many people have completed it. And while the numbers do keep going up week after week, they're not going up as fast as they should. And it's really important that everybody gets counted because every person counted can actually, I think the stat is be equivalent to about $1,400 a year in federal money for various resources and programs in our region. So it's really important for folks to fill out the census.
And it's super easy.
We'll
recommend. Cool. Well, it looks like this is an event that's coming up from Code for America, the 2020 National Day of Civic Hacking, right around the corner on September 12th. And it looks like for more info, you can go to codeforchicago.org, or you can go to the meetup link that is seen at the bottom of this slide here. But yeah.
Yeah, this is a thing they've done for many years now. Code for America is a national civic tech organization, and they have volunteer groups similar to Chai Hack Night in cities all over the country. And so this is a way for folks to collaborate across those cities and work on various civic technology and volunteer projects together. So there's a Code for America brigade here in Chicago. It's not us, it's a different group of folks who we know, and they're great. And they're called Code for Chicago. So yeah, check it out. It seems like it'd be a really cool thing.
Cool. So like we said before, after Elliott's presentation and after the Q&A, we're going to go to our post-presentation Zoom call so that everybody can get a chance to introduce themselves. And that'll start right around 8, maybe a little after. And you can join us by going to bit.ly/chn-remote-zoom. And it'll be a lot of fun, and you'll get to hear about the breakout groups.
Yep, and we'll put that link back up at the end of the broadcast too, and drop the link into the live chat as well, so folks can follow along with us. All right, that's it for announcements, right?
Yeah, I think that's about all.
All right. Well, Elliott, are you there? He's here. Hey, Elliott. All right. Well, we're super excited to introduce Elliott Ramos, data editor at WBEZ. And we'll let you take it away, Elliott. And again, a reminder to folks to type your questions in the live chat, and we will get those added to the list, and we'll be asking Elliott after his presentation is over in a little bit. So take it away, Elliott.
First off, thank you everybody for having me. Really humbling to be speaking with everybody. I'm going to be talking about something I've been covering for years, and it's about the city's towing program and one slice of that program. So I'm going to share my screen, and if anybody can't hear me, just holler, let me know. And
you're good.
All right, can you see that?
Yep.
All right. So Chicago's vehicle impoundment program is it's a program specifically made for dealing with impounds as they're used in when somebody gets arrested. And there's certain types of violations, an impound, it could trigger an automatic impound. Let me go to the first slide. Not to be confused with Chicago's asset forfeiture program or the boot and tow program, which is for people that get ticket debt. The vehicle impoundment program involves police seizing the car during a stop for a violation, and then they hold on to that car until the offender pays the fine for that offense. Usually the seizure starts after an officer stops a driver for violations of state law or city ordinance. So I have a list over here of violations that could get you an automatic impound and would be caught up in this program. You will notice that a significant number of them have been struck out. That's because a ordinance that Lightfoot introduced last month and was approved by City Council last month actually took a lot of these violations off the list. Some of them are still liable for a fine or administrative fine, but it doesn't trigger an automatic impound. Some of them are very, very questionable in the holdovers from the 80s and 90s. Littering and playing loud music is up until last month was something that you get your car automatically impounded. Having a false registration or temporary plate. Driving on a revoked or suspended license is actually a huge one. That was first instituted in 2010. Everybody knows that it's illegal to drive on a suspended license, but aldermen wanted to, and we'll get into this later, but aldermen had wanted to do an automatic impound if you were caught with that. But at the time, they didn't account for people that had ticket debt. driving while intoxicated. My personal favorite is reckless driving or at or interfering with a funeral procession. Little funny things that we have. So what's involved? It's one of the very few times that I can use the word Kafka-esque without it sounding pretentious. It's actually the most literal thing I could have thought about, because this program involves so many different departments, so many different personnel, and just to navigate it is insane. And the people I've talked to that have had to navigate it just sort of gave up all hope, and not only gave up the car, but just gave up even paying attention to collection notices. One of the people I interviewed that had close to $10,000 in fines didn't even know he had that much money, or owed that much money. I had to take the data and show him, like, did you know you owe this much? It's like, nope, didn't know it was that high. So many different departments are involved that when I started doing the story, it was over a year ago at this point. And when I started talking with previous administration officials, and then as it pivoted to the new mayor, I still was talking with a lot of these different departments, and they finally all got in the same room and were able to connect the dots. After I kind of just did the work for them, just shuffled it like, hey guys. So who's involved? Well, the police department, they initiate the tows during the arrest. The Department of Streets and Sanitation, while they're in charge of impounding vehicles, they actually contract this out to a private towing company. That's United Road Towing. They have been the private towing company for several decades, and they usually buy the cars once they're seized, and then they turn them over and sell them at auction. Department of Administrative Hearings, they adjudicate these cases. This is not the same as a criminal court. This is a municipal court. These are lawyers that the city hires to adjudicate things like parking tickets, building code violations. But in a lot of ways, what this program does is effectively double criminalize misdemeanors. And then if you don't land up in traffic court, if you don't land up in some sort of felony court for some of these laws, you wind up in this municipal court. And in some cases, even though you don't have criminal charges, you are then sort of charged for a municipal fine in violation of a municipal ordinance. Department of Finance, they are the ones who send you the collection notices. And also the state's attorney's office is involved in some of these cases, because a fraction of these actually do land up in the official asset forfeiture program. And what happens? Well, arrestees can sometimes appear in administrative hearing. They can be cleared of liability. About 40% of people that get caught up in this are cleared of liability, but not always. They do not return the car to you until the arrestee pays the fine or the violation if they're found automatically liable. Now, here's where it gets confusing for people. If you are arrested, you have to go in person to request a hearing. Then you have to go in person again to the hearing. If the car is involved in an investigation with the police department will typically hold the car, and storage fees will continue to rack up. Often, because maybe it's a used car, maybe say it's worth $2,000 or $3,000, some of the baseline fines for these start at $2,000. So some people just don't request a hearing if it exceeds the initial value of the car, and the impound fees continue to stack up until they actually dispose of the vehicle. In some cases, that's months, and in some cases, even over a year. So for the first 5 days of the program, it's $20 a day for a storage fee, but that's typically when you get towed for like the snow ban or something. After 5 days, it goes to $35 a day. And for some of these individuals, that fee accrued indefinitely for months. If they're found liable, then you're on the hook for the administrative tow fine, which, as I said, is $1,000, sometimes $2,000. The tow fee is $150, the storage fees. And here's the crushing part. There's an interest that compounds on all those fees. And then there's a collections fee that compounds on the interest, storage fees, and tow fees. This is why I started running into individuals that owed as much as $20,000, $30,000, and $40,000 in fines. If that seems insane, it is. So how big is this program? Well, if anybody has seen any of my previous work that revolves around, say, the winter parking ban or the ticket that, you're seeing a 2017 visualization of the entire impound program that the city runs. The vehicle impoundment program is only one slice, this little guy down here, of that program. But even then, that's about the annual amount of cars that the program takes in. And a good chunk of them land up getting sold. This is just how it's always run. It definitely got on steroids the past decade or so, but this sort of gives you an idea that when we talk about this particular program, It's not asset forfeiture. It's not the boot and tow program. It's not the winter parking program. It's not the relocation for a Sox game program. This is specifically cars that were involved in crime-related impounds. But I do want to point out, though, if you might notice that there's things like narcotics and DUI, firearms. Aldermen and officials for years have sort of used firearms and narcotics as the reason or rationale to even have this program. But then what ended up happening is that suspended licenses and particularly marijuana arrests were the biggest input into the program. So what went wrong? As I said, aldermen officials, they kind of said, hey, we need to get guns off the street. Hey, drug dealers need to be off the street. Let's use this impound program. The problem is that they incrementally kept adding things over the years. I know that Alderman Raymond Lopez added, there was a fly dumping thing because he had a huge thing in his board about it, and they did a $5,000 fine to it. And more recently, I believe last year, it was in addition to a $10,000 fine and an automatic impound for drag racing. I just want to note that drag racing was already against the law, and there was already previous fines on the books for that. They just upped the ante. So in 2010, in 2009, there was a push to get automatic impounds for driving on a suspended license. This actually had started in 2007. And then that part failed because Mayor Daley's administration said that they couldn't handle the amount of cars that would flood the impound lot. In 2009, a pregnant woman got struck. And this was the impetus behind sort of putting automatic impounds for driving on a suspended license, because sometimes at the time was also running a series of investigations on dangerous drivers. They would go to traffic court, people who had DUIs, and then follow them around, leaving traffic court after getting their license suspended. And this is a visualization of the results of that. As you can see, the moment that the ordinance went into effect in 2010, you started seeing that it made up the bulk of the automatic impounds. Before that, it was all narcotics arrests. There were DUIs, of course, in there, and solicitation is another one. But over time, driving on a suspended license became the primary entrant into the vehicle impoundment program. And I would also like to note that this is not state traffic court. This is, if you got a state traffic court citation, you have to go to that court and to the administrative hearing as well. In 2011, shortly after Rahm Emanuel took office, if we can go that far back, there was a budget crisis, as there is one right now. And the city was looking to generate all sorts of revenue from fines and fees, water and sewage tax increases. And as we reported with ProPublica Illinois, there's a lot of increases of fines and fees around parking tickets. I pulled this audio from one of the reporters that we had here. I just want you to listen to this. This is actually the budget committee hearing with the finance chair at the time, who was Alderman Ed Burke. This is Alexandra Holt, who was then the former budget director, making a case for increasing the fines and fees on this towing program.
That they are in a car when this offense takes place, not when they are outside of a vehicle.
That's correct.
And what is the estimate of revenue from these changes?
Yeah, so the estimate is about $14 million. And just, to make sure I'm completely clear, we are talking about the tow fees associated with this. There are obviously, as you state, other charges that are placed if somebody has an illegal firearm. At the same time, if there's a DUI or solicitation or an illegal firearm or any one of another number of other offenses that occurs in a vehicle, the city tows that vehicle. There are fines associated with the tow, as well as the storage, and also the ability to get your vehicle back. We're talking about those purely municipal fines, and that generates about $14 million in additional revenue.
Additional, over and above.
Additional, that's correct.
It's revenue now.
Give me just a second. I have it here. One of the numbers I hadn't yet got stuffed in my head. I think we're roughly doubling it, but let me confirm for you exactly what we're collecting right now. Here it is. Yeah, so we're actually doubling it. We're collecting about 13 million right now, and then we're proposing about another $14 million worth.
So I use that clip because, well, one, we're a radio station, but two, you sort of hear the levity in the voice when they're talking about numbers, and it seems like a revenue thing, but they're talking about imposing steep fines up to $2,000 in some cases on individuals for, and you heard the term, the word firearms and stuff being thrown around there, but the vast majority of entrants into the program are for small offenses, mostly misdemeanors. In 2012, it got a little bit worse when marijuana was being discussed in terms of decriminalization. They launched a pot ticketing ordinance, but there was a lot of negotiation that was happening between the mayor's office and aldermen. And in that process, they decided to keep vehicle impoundment for marijuana possession on the books. But if you were walking around the streets, you could still get a pot ticket. So the issue is that no matter what amount of marijuana you had on your person, if you were walking, you could be subjected to a $250 ticket. But if you were driving, you could face a upwards of $2,000 fine, plus all the storage fees. How this looked like is that even though we decriminalized it in 2012, we could still see that the Chicago Police Department initiated a number of narcotics impounds, and most of them were marijuana. Actually, marijuana was half, and then as marijuana became decriminalized, you also start to notice that the police department started enforcing or not enforcing other narcotics-related arrests in tandem. The end result of this was that people started noticing that even though we started to decriminalize marijuana, parts of Chicago were still getting arrested at disproportionate rates than others. My colleague McDumpy now at ProPublica Illinois made a lot of reporting about this back then. And this is the end result. This was one of my sources in my story, and he owed nearly $10,000 for a marijuana arrest that happened at that time. He's not alone. There were thousands of individuals that owed this much money for marijuana possession. Most of them never saw criminal charges because they got dropped. There were both county and state efforts to criminalize it at the time. It's not legal. And one of the big issues with this program is that even though it's been decriminalized and we talk about expungements of marijuana cases, you have all these individuals that owe millions of dollars in outstanding fines related to these arrests. And then here's where it gets fun. One of the things that officials for months and actually over a year weren't able to explain to me why some people had so much more in fines than others. They kept saying, well, we increased the municipal fine to $1,000 or $2,000 in some cases. And I'm like, well, that doesn't explain how somebody gets $10,000, $15,000, $20,000. This is a part of a spreadsheet. It's a combined, there's 3 different data sets combined on this. It's a spreadsheet: administrative hearings, violation, Department of Finance data. There's also some police data on this as well. I think it might be cut off. But what I found was that you start to see, just by sorting by date, the fines would go up in around 2014. And specifically September 4th and September 5th of 2014, you start to see that the storage fees go from all capping at $610 to jumping up to $3,000, $2,000, $6,000 overnight. This person, the docket number that ends in 376 and then the one that ends in 355, you can see that they were arrested for the same crime, driving on a suspended license, just one day apart. But then you can see the difference in the storage fees that they paid out. When I finally found out what was causing this, I both flipped out and became enraged at the same time. And as you can see, when it's visualized, you can see right where the storage fee increase started ballooning and then started becoming the bulk of the problems with the vehicle impoundment program debt. This little slope here, you can start to see in 2010 when license suspensions went into effect. You can see where the baseline administrative fines went into effect in 2012 and the 2012 budget. And then in 2014, just things went off the rails. This original line annotation on the 2014 used to say Jesus Christ in all caps. I changed it obviously for professional purposes, but that was the original intent. And this is how much debt we're talking about. This is a spreadsheet that was provided by the Department of Finance. It breaks out all the outstanding assessed debt and the amount that was paid for by individuals in this program. The total outstanding debt is over $500 million from this one program over the past decade. it's insane because all of it is just, it's imaginary. Most of the debt was improperly assessed. Nobody, as you can see from the sum of the total paid, could ever afford to pay these insane fees. And you can see when she mentioned that they're going to estimate to make X amount of revenue from the amount in 2012, and then you see it again in 2013, and then the revenue just drops off a cliff. At a certain point, you can only squeeze so much blood out of a stone, and they effectively ran out of people to get money from. And this is fine. 2016, the police department's use of stop and frisk became under greater scrutiny, particularly after Laquan McDonald, but even before that, they started noticing data problems in their reporting practices. So in 2016, you start to see a fall in the decrease in use of stop and frisk by the Chicago Police Department. During that same time, you're seeing the use of car stops tripling and then jumping by tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands. And the Department of Justice report, 2017 report on the Chicago Police Department, will later show that the police department were encouraged to go out and make as many car stops as possible, because that's just good policing. It's going to facilitate weapons. It's going to facilitate drugs. And nobody ever talked about what this would do to the community relationships. Another thing to note, though, is that even when you get arrested for municipal violation, it doesn't necessarily equal state violation. So what I found by following the statistical study, which is where all the Chicago Police Department keeps their citations for moving violations, you start to see that there was a lot fewer traffic violations being issued than there are municipal violations. The traffic court violation obviously might be a few $100s, but the municipal violation runs into thousands of dollars. Also, there's the lack of oversight on these programs, particularly when it goes to municipal hearing process. Many times Chicago police officers are not required to show up to the hearing. And I found that over 50% of the people that were involved in these cases were found automatically liable for failure to request a hearing. It's sort of a quasi-judicial system that's absent a lot of the safeguards that's afforded to you in a criminal justice system. So Chicago police officers, if they wanted a handy tool that allowed them to just stop anyone they wanted and to take and seize their vehicle, this would be that tool. As I said, there's not as much oversight. The police are not required to take demographic data on municipal violations. So we talk about curfew violations, we talk about open container violations, even pot tickets. They're not required to take race data, any kind of demographic data, other than to say that when and where it was issued in the violation, and then they take down the person's information so the ticket can be issued. The problem with that, though, is that for some of these municipal violations, you can't see the disproportionate effects it has in different communities. So I was able to find this out, at least on the citation end, by taking the traffic study and then joining it with the police department's own citation database. When I was able to do that for what few people were getting citations of this, the vast majority of them, almost 75% in some cases, were Black. About a quarter of them were Latino, and then the rest were white. And that's about it. I just wanted to sort of break out some of the data sources I used. I'm going to start publishing some of these out once they're in a cleaned up format, but I used Department of Streets and Sanitation towing data, Department of Streets and Sanitation vehicle sales data, administrative hearings case data, and the findings, both the violation, the ticket that was issued, and the findings. Department of Finance, I FOIA'd and obtained their entire database for all the people caught up in this program. Chicago Police Department vehicle seizure data, which I was then able to join with the towing data. The Illinois Statistical Traffic Study database, CPD's citation database, and every marijuana arrest that's been done for the past 20 years. And that's about it. It's a lot to take in. It's a lot to process. And it's very hard. And I found it very hard to try to explain to people, why does this matter? It matters because it gives the Chicago Police Department overwhelming power to seize somebody's property, but also stop them. And it doesn't have the same levels of oversight that a lot of our even stop and frisk has. It doesn't have the same level of oversight that the criminal justice system has. It drowns them in debt on top of the stuff that we've talked about with ticketing in the past. This is problematic because it's a hole that nobody can crawl out of. No one can pay a $10,000 or $20,000 fine or fee. And just to give you an idea of the scope of how many times this happened, it's 250,000 people that got assessed over $500 million in debt just over a decade. And most of them were from Black Chicago. And in a nutshell, that's why people should care. With that, I leave it to our hosts.
Awesome. Thank you, Elliott. That was great and succinct and riveting, but also infuriating. Yeah, we're taking questions now. So please add them in the chat, the live chat on YouTube, and we already have some. You want to do the first one, Katie?
Sure. Yeah. Okay. So the first one, what kind of help do you think the Chi-Hacknight community could provide to help in your future reporting? And what's the best way to engage with you?
I'm kind of a novice on Twitter. I guess but like that would probably be the most easiest, successful way. You can follow me at Chicago L, EL. I thought it was being funny with the play on words with my nickname and the L system, but that would probably be an easy way to reach out. I think that one of the things I want to do, and I've done this in the past with a lot of my stories, is just to get the data out there. David Eads and Melissa Sanchez, when I work with them, getting the parking ticket database out there was a huge deal. When I started doing this stuff, I actually released the entirety of the administrative hearing process publicly on our data portal on Data World. And I encourage everybody to just sit there and play with it and run queries, because you see some crazy things. The building code violations are in there, but so are quality of life citations. I did a couple stories on unshoveled sidewalks, but also there's data in there for citations for uncut weeds. This isn't, I haven't published this one yet, but there's one of the things that I found out with so open container laws. It's the age of COVID where everybody's basically drinking outside. But like a lot of the open containers laws were only exclusively enforced in low income minority communities. And I think that the more that this data gets out there, I just need it out there so people can sort of like contextualize it with the conversations we're having right now. But yeah, if reaching out on Twitter, that's probably the best bet for starters. And I give away a lot of data. Like, here, take it. Like, I have my little FOIA box. I'm just like, here.
Awesome. I'll take the next one. Oh, sorry. Was that Katie?
Oh no, I was just saying little data gifts. I was imagining like a
or like, big data gifts.
Yeah.
I'll take the next one. So this is a great example of impact journalism in that the city made meaningful changes to their policy or planning on making meaningful changes to their policy because of this reporting. How much of an impact did you expect to have when you started writing these stories before you published? And did you expect the city's response to be more or less than what it was?
So initially, when we started doing these stories, and before I teamed up with Melissa, it felt like a lot of reporters were just hitting their head against the wall. The former administration was definitely, I don't know what his policy was on FOIA, but it was very, very hard to get FOIAs from city departments. It felt like there was always somebody watching what was requested out of news organizations, and that was sort of put up the flagpole. And all the times the difference between something becoming burdensome was very, very blurry. So when we started doing that, when we finally were able to pry some data away and then sort of tell these stories, we felt that it was still hitting a roadblock. And even when lawsuits started coming out about it, it was still like was far and away from actually any kind of meaningful reform. I think that the election played a big part of it. I think that the incidents around being referred to as a 1%er mayor, but also the issues around LaQuan McDonald also played a part of it, because we started critically thinking about what the police were doing in these communities. And once that became a mayoral campaign issue, I think that there was the political momentum and the will to do so, but also not just me, but other people that have been working in this. I think CJ at Reason Magazine, Melissa Sanchez and David Eads, and McDumpke, people that do this type of reporting, and Tracy Swartz, formerly of the Red Eye and Tribune. But when they put this data out there, it makes it easy to sort of to see what's going on, and deniability is not there. you can't pretend it away at that point. And I think that's a big part of the open data community, is just having it out there and seeing inventory numbers, seeing case docket numbers. It's like, these are people, they're not just data points.
You got the next one, Katie?
Yes. Okay, next one from the audience. What was the journalistic process like for this story? Any particular methods for trying to track the process journey you described as Kafkaesque?
A loving partner who has infinite patience is definitely a help. I can't say how many nights that I have been playing around with data, and then at 11 or 12 o'clock at night, a glass of wine pops up on my desk. And so it's just a good support network, and being able to work at an organization that values in-depth investigatory reporting helps. And also just the fact that nobody is their own community. Like a lot of this, a lot of the open data program that started in Chicago was built up over time. Even the story I did on COVID disparities and deaths, that was built up the fact that the open data portal that was built to sort of track homicides for the county with the medical examiner's data, that was made in part by slow incremental pushes to get that kind of data publicly accessible and regularly published. The process is that, like, when I started doing all this stuff, is that I had a crazy board. It was actually called the Crazy Board. You know, when they have Always Sunny in Philadelphia, and the guy's like sitting there like looking at all the little string maps and everything. I actually built one, but it was just, I started noticing more and more as I got data sets of like towing data and citation data and parking ticket data, is that's a lot of overlapping indexes and categories were in other data sets. I started to map those out, and then I started to see build relational databases, but like I started to figure out, like, once you start combining these things, you're seeing things that the policymakers didn't see. Well, more often than not, I was informing city departments and officials of something that they didn't know existed. And you hear whispers of it, but in some reporting, when some of it comes out piecemeal, like when there was like biking on sidewalk citations that were issued. But like that one citation that the Tribune did, there were several others. There's all these other citations in there. I'm like, why not just ask for the whole database and then see if you see that same repeat behavior? And I think everybody on Chi-Hack-Night knows that every map of Chicago looks the same after a while. Like, let's ask that question. Why is that? Why does every map look the same? And when we're dealing with issues of covering systemic racism, let's see if there's something wrong with the system. And for nerds, it's a database, and see what you can find and the relationships you find in there. And then we can start asking the questions of what the data leads.
Following on to that, there's another question, which I think you sort of talked about a little bit, but maybe we can get into it a little bit more. But what was the tip-off to begin looking into this? And how can we avoid writing policies that have these effects? So it's kind of two questions, but yeah, what was the tip-off for this?
So when I started doing reporting on the towing program, I actually started with the winter parking ban, which is that one slice. That's about 10,000 cars a year. And for those that know me, know I haven't driven since 2004. And I got my car towed twice in college. It was the first time I had to borrow money from family. And that was sort of like what set off the thing, is I wanted to understand the patterns of just how that worked and why that operated the way it did. Come to find out that Wicker Park on the band route is like intersected in two major arterial streets that causes, and coupled with permit parking, it made it so that anybody that went in those streets during the winter is assured to get towed, as anybody who's visited Wicker Park on a bar night would find out. That was the start of it. But then as I started gathering more data, I started realizing there was other towing data in there. And CJ at Reason Magazine, he was the first one to sort of blow the lid off this. And he interviewed people that owed thousands of dollars in fines. And this was in 2018. So that timeline I did in the presentation, you start to see that it actually blew up faster than, and the same with parking tickets, the bankruptcies and everything else. They knew something was up, but like they didn't have the idea of the sheer scope of it and what they did. Those little incremental policy changes had huge, drastic, life-changing effects. And as with like parking tickets and towing, is that it's drastic in the fact that like just simply sending somebody a license suspension is a big, huge life indictment on somebody. Taking away their vehicle for most people, if you don't own a home, is the most expensive thing that you own. It also takes away their mobility for work, driving the kids to school, hospital visits, you name it. And to say nothing of the fact that it ruins their credit. You can't even lease an apartment without good credit. So just on the towing figures, 250,000 people over a decade. On it's even worse when we talk about the ticketing part of it. So like these small little incremental enforcements or micro policing had drastic effects on these communities. And then everyone like wonders what happened. Like you screwed over thousands upon thousands of families in a very short amount of time. And I think that for policymakers, simply looking at a number, an aggregate number on a spreadsheet, you do a little bit of homework. One of the things that the Inspector General came out a few years ago in their report was to say that Rahm Emanuel never did any kind of assessment, any of the fee increases or what their impact would be. And as my colleague Maria at my shop, she also did the story on the water shutoffs. When we started seeing people living in the third largest city in the United States were not able to have access to water. And these were effects of policy decisions that were focused entirely on the revenue and not on the people.
Hope some of the policy folks are listening now. You want to do the next one, Katie?
Sure. Okay. Does expungement not get rid of fines? Is that general or is that per specific expungement?
So if you're talking about expungements for like criminal records, that's an entirely separate beast than what you owe the city of Chicago. So the same goes with building code violations, restaurant violations, stuff like that. Even the tickets and the citations that the city is giving out for people violating COVID restrictions, those are municipal ordinance violations. And those are adjudicated under a separate body of law. And it's very, very fascinating. I think that, I'm just gonna grab this guy. If anybody has a chance to read this book, it's Punishment Without Crime, and it talks about the misdemeanor system. And I was fortunate enough to talk to the author for this very article. And when you think about the criminal justice system, 80% of the entirety of what we think about criminal justice system are misdemeanors. They're small crimes. And as you go to like certain areas, particularly say suburbs, and you're dealing with associations and how your grass is cut, are you shoveling your sidewalk? That slippery slope of what constitutes a sort of nuisance versus a crime, and whether or not we think it's worth it to enforce a lot of that crime, those are questions that we need to be asking about when we think about policing in general. If 80% of policing is the enforcement of small crimes, police are not cheap. They're salaried pension employees that get a lot of overtime, which we already blew through for the year. So if you're thinking that their time is better spent on issuing citations or quality of life thing versus other more public safety concerns, that should be part of the conversation.
We got a couple of questions that are kind of around the same, kind of driving at the same thing. So is there any momentum to end this program now? And have there been any constitutional challenges to it? So
I just wrote a story today about there are constitutional challenges. So there was a federal lawsuit that was brought on by the Institute for Justice, and a judge ruled that on Friday that the case can proceed forward, but it was because of all sorts of legalese that I'm not a lawyer, but the constitutionality part was dismissed. But it's now being challenged with the Illinois state constitution on excessive fines and fees. And I'm sorry, can you repeat the rest of the question?
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, is there momentum to end the program, and is there a constitutional challenge? I think you started to cover it, yeah.
So one of the things I will hand it to Lightfoot's policy people is that it's very, very clever use of striking like the low-hanging fruit. But I think about like maximizing output, and the vast majority of them, the entrance to the program were marijuana arrests, which has already been addressed, but then also driving on a suspended license. And one thing to note that Lightfoot's people did is they actually went up, not just acknowledging people who had suspended licenses for parking ticket debt, because the city and state already ended that practice. Like if you had non-moving violations, then they're not going to suspend your license. But this went up because it also included speed camera and red light cameras, which is also the next step up short of somebody. You're basically at that point only capturing people that are public safety concerns, reckless driving and DUIs. So I think that that was like a simple flick of the pen that's going to have the effect of tens of thousands of people, just by like doing an assessment of like what is this like. The noise ordinance violation, I get it. In the 90s, people were blaring stereos, and some people thought it was an issue, and they thought automatic impounds. But back then, there was a few $100 fine. I think also they should check in on the police department about when and where and how often they enforce these laws. All of them were almost exclusively enforced in Black Chicago neighborhoods. Like this is like a noise ordinance that says if you're just playing your music too loud, or littering was still enforced up until this past year. If you, in Chicago, up until last month, if you were littering something from your car, whatever interpretation that would be, you could get an automatic impoundment and a fine and then face thousands of dollars of fees. In some cases, some people did lose their cars.
Wow. You got the next one, Katie?
Yeah. Are there any studies about the downstream effects of excessive fines like these and towing on the employment, et cetera, that you've done or are aware of?
So I know the Chicago Jobs Council, as well as the Fines and Fees Justice Center, have been doing a lot of work in this regard. The Chicago Jobs Council had made it their lifeblood to sort of like get license suspensions for parking ticket debt and fines and fees lifted. The conversation around policing is now starting to, in some corners, in some cities, starting to go into the arena of fines and fees, because it's sort of a backdoor method of like when we think about felonies versus misdemeanors. If you're anything that you're jailed for less than a year is considered a misdemeanor. Anything greater than that is a felony. But when we talk about the criminal justice system and mass incarceration and the costs, both in terms of livelihoods and families and financial costs of maintaining the criminal justice system and the policing around it, that's like the vast majority of our conversation around criminal justice. But when we talk about the enforcement of small crimes, we're talking about 80%, then that's the significant amount. Most people interact with police via that way. Most people will get a ticket for an open container. Most people, surprisingly enough, not in Wrigley, will get a ticket for public urination. And I say that like, but when you look at the disproportionate effects, like in what land in Chicago does Wrigley not show up as number one for public urination citations? But it was again in the South and West Side. When I did, when the officials tried to tamp down because of behavior that was happening at the Pride Parade and St. Patrick's Day Parade, they said, well, $500 fine or up to $1,000 fine for drinking on a parade route within 500 feet. And then when I FOIA'd the data and looked at it, they were only, the Pride Parade only had one ticket, St. Patrick's Day Parade had none, and all the parade tickets that had these more expensive open container laws associated with were enforced in the West Side and the South Side. And like, what parades are they having? And then you start to see that the small fines and fees give the police department wide latitude to sort of like be judge, jury, and executioner in terms of doling out punishments that have no oversight, particularly around ticketing.
Next question is actually kind of mentioned that that you felt like really privileged to be able to work at an institution that supported this kind of long form investigative journalism. The journalism industry, globally has been in crisis for a while, and it's been exacerbated in the last 4 months. How has that impacted the time and resources available for reporting on stories like these? And are there trends that give you kind of hope about ways that may change?
It worries me a lot. We here at WBEZ, we are not immune to the economic conditions of COVID. We did have layoffs at our organization, not in the newsroom, but still people that cared a lot about the institution. I know a lot of newsrooms across the United States that are laying off. I've had some friends that got laid off from their jobs. And this type of work, I'm fortunate enough but it's always a back burner. I'm just my own data island sometimes, and I don't have the resources or help to do some of this stuff. And then just the process of collecting data is very time intensive. To join it, to analyze it, to understand it, do the proper interviews, to contextualize it over time, it does take time. And I've been staring at this sort of like, I can see sort of from afar, like the goal of trying to figure out the systems. And it takes so much time that I always have to keep it in a perpetual back burner versus it must be great to be in a shop owned by, say, Bezos, and then he can throw a data army at it. And then you can sort of flip out those results right away. But for us in the small shops, it takes time. And it doesn't mean that I get to drop everything I'm doing and focus on that. I have to also help the education desk, the politics desk on their data sets. And it's always a sort of a balance of those priorities and shifting back and forth, and then picking up a project, dropping it, picking up a project and dropping it. This story itself was supposed to have been published months before COVID. And when COVID happened, everything was dropped. And then when the unrest followed, it was dropped. So when I started picking this up again, so much time had passed that Lightfoot's administration actually had taken the data and the analysis and all the conversations that we had, and they already wrote laws before I got the chance to publish this story, which I'm grateful. Like the output's the same, but it does sort of jump that sort of like process of like you put a thing out and like the public's like, oh my God, this is happening, and then they're like, change this, and they're like, okay, and then it circumvented that whole journalism anger, whatever, and then process. And well, I'm glad that happened. It actually happened where I got scooped on my own story by the mayor's office, who I had been talking with for months about the problems with this thing. So that happened, but it's hard. And I would say that, like, I know it's cliche, I'm wearing my WBEZ shirt, but donate, it helps a lot. Including not just our shop, but a lot of nonprofit organizations like Republica and Block Club are operating and doing some great work here.
Great. Katie, do we have more questions?
It looks like we have, let's see, I think that might be, oh, okay. So this is on the clarification. Okay, so the initial question was, should I read the initial one and then?
Yeah. Well, actually, I think I can ask. I think I know what they're okay. asking. So there's a question about, it seems like there's a lack of oversight that let this problem grow and let the fees sort of continue to compound, and the new ways that people get fined grew sort of without being checked. How is that sort of vacuum made? I think it's kind of a question you maybe already addressed around like sort of lack of oversight, but I mean, is there any further comment you have on sort of how these things kind of continue to stack on top of each other and what drove that?
I think that, and I say this after going through LexisNexis and pulling up all the clips of this program of every single like ordinance as it's been introduced over several years. When aldermen decide to do a little bit of political grandstanding, we're like, we need to do this, and sort of know that like what is said and done policy-wise on paper doesn't always come out as once you put that policy on a massive multi-pronged bureaucratic system. And also know that you've literally just given another quiver to a policing agency to utilize it as they see fit. One wouldn't think that like drinking near parade route tickets would be used judiciously differently than standard open container tickets, but because they have a different price point in terms of like a $250 ticket versus say, I know it has a range of like 500 to 1,000, but if you have some individuals that are callous enough to know that difference and then to dole them out separately, there needs to be oversight. I think one of the things that Melissa and I found out was that there were no checks on the amount of parking tickets that the Chicago Police Department were issuing at all, not just from the finance department, but from the police department. And when people who are empowered to do this type of stuff to other people realize that you can get away with it once, it encourages it to grow over time. And it's why oversight is such a huge issue. And I think that's a big part of why for us and the press and people in the open data community, having access to these databases is hugely important. It's why protection of FOIA laws around getting databases is hugely important. There was no oversight, not just this program. There's no oversight to ticketing. There's no oversight to the policymakers who raised the fees in the first place. There was none. And this stuff would just, I'm affirmed that it hurt so many people that it would have eventually gotten out, but it would have taken longer.
Yeah. So it sounds like, just to follow up on that, there have been policy changes prescribed by the current administration. Have any of those included adding more oversight?
Huh.
I don't know, or
I think that there's oversight built into the fact that, like, with all the lawsuits that have been piling up around this program and other parts of the associated programs and parts of the stuff that's been going on with ticketing, I think it's forcing oversight just because it's becoming cost prohibitive.
okay.
And I think that it's the forced oversight is like drag kicking and screaming because you can no longer afford to hurt people. It's the oversight, but I think that's just, sorry, I apologize. It's a little cynical. There are people, and I've met a tremendous amount of people, and I would say that the people that have worked in a lot of city departments, including streets and sanitation, Department of Finance, they were like, what are you doing with all this data? And they're a little bit fearful, like, are they going to get in trouble, or are they going to make their bosses look bad? And these are a lot of good people that work in government that were doing their civic duty. And I'm going to put my little West Wing cap on for a moment. And they realized that once we were being responsible with the data and that we were not sitting there going into attack mode first, contextualizing it and doing responsible journalism and approaching them and saying, hey, did you know this was an issue? I think that doing gotcha journalism, like, I'm not going to sit there and spend 6 months or 8 months or a year on a data analysis and then call them at the 11th hour and say, can you comment on this? Like, that's irresponsible. And I think that people in my profession that do that should really rethink their practices, because if you do that and you start up an antagonistic relationship from the start, it makes other people think that there's nobody working in the government that has any kind of non-negative, non-malicious intent. And I always assume stupidity instead of malice, or ignorance rather.
Right. Well, that's, I think we're out of time. Maybe that's the note we end on, but I really appreciate you taking the time to go through all this and answering all of our questions. This was a really, really great talk. Thank you.
I thank you so much for having me, guys. Chi-Hack Night, you guys are doing amazing work. The open data community in Chicago is among the best in the country, in my personal opinion. So it's really nice to be in a crowd of like-minded people.
Awesome. Well, you're welcome back anytime.
Yeah.
All right. Are we ready to switch to the civic hacking portion, Katie?
Yeah, I think we're ready.
Okay. Josh, if you could maybe put the screen back up, or we could drop the bit.ly, but we're going to be switching over to a Zoom call that is more participatory. We'll be doing some socializing, some announcements from the community, and then breakout groups are going to be pitching there as well. So we're going to get that started just about now. You can go to this link, bit.ly/CHN remote Zoom to get there, and I'll be joining myself in a minute or so right here. Anything else we got to do, Katie?
No, I think that's about it.
Okay, well then the very last thing we always like to say at Chi-Hack Night is,
Yeah.
go forth and
hack.
All right, thanks everybody.
Bye.
Good night.